What is he saying? What is he saying? He's completely clueless. What does that even mean?
I mean, I don't think what he did.
Have I seen his debate with the Libertarian? Oh my God! Fuck this debate. I saw part of this debate and I got heated.
Ideally, I would be
heated. I got so heated. We gotta watch this debate. We gotta watch this debate. We gotta watch this debate for me. We gotta watch this debate for you, and we gotta watch this debate for all the viewers at home. This Libertarian guy right here is so unbelievably uneducated on Ukraine, but said stuff with such authority that only a Libertarian could do, okay? We have to watch this debate because Destiny does pretty well here. Not only does he do well here, but this guy just starts straight lying on our boy Ukraine, okay? They start lying on our boy Ukraine, and we cannot let that stand. We have to watch this debate instead of the fucking Nuance 401, which they said it was heated. Didn't seem heated to me, okay? That's something like false advertising, clickbait. Okay, let's watch.
An anarchist and like in ideals. I hate everything that the government has done so far.
What about Russia? Russia's not invading a NATO country.
Not now. I'm saying they need to build up the military.
Won't. They won't. Even with the military, because it'd be nuclear war. It'd be over.
No, it wouldn't.
Yes, it would be.
No. Conventional warfare between two nuclear countries does not necessarily mean that you're.
It would if it was between Russia and NATO and the United States. This is why Russia and the U.S. are so careful not to cross swords. It's because they know that that's where it could eventually lead, right?
It could. That doesn't mean it will.
No, but I don't think Russia's ever invading a NATO country.
Are you ready to get banned from YouTube?
My name is Bailey Cole. I am the treasurer for Aggies for Liberty on campus, and I am also a Libertarian Party candidate for Brazos.
Somebody say he's a Libertarian Party candidate. Oh boy. Oh, and he knows so little. I'm sorry, but the thing is, somebody said, careful, this guy could be my viewer. If he is my viewer, he's banished from my community because he's taken nothing from my conversations about Ukraine. He got everything wrong in this talk. Let's watch. I'm sorry.
For Aggies for Liberty on campus, and I am also a Libertarian Party candidate for Brazos County, Justice of the Peace.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. My name's Steven. I think Joe Biden is doing a tremendous job in office.
So when you say good, are you talking about relative to other presidents or in an absolute sense?
In an absolute sense, in terms of like what are the decisions he could be making, and then I mean relative to other presidents, I guess I'd say too, but that's a harder one because obviously you have to deal with the situations with the hand you're dealt when you come into office. So.
All right. So I just would have to ask, like, what? Because I know who you are, but I don't like actually watch it, so I couldn't articulate your positions. What exactly do you think it is that Joe Biden has done that is good? Like, at least like a couple specific examples.
Sure. So I think that all of the decisions he's made foreign policy-wise in regards to Ukraine, I think have been almost perfect. I would say that legislatively, it's been pretty amazing that he was able to get the infrastructure bill.
My main criticisms when it comes to Ukraine and Biden is just like, we should send them longer range missiles. Like, it's like, for me, it's like, it's kind of nitpicking. It's important, but it's mostly nitpicking. Like, overwhelmingly, Biden has handled the invasion of Ukraine very well. He's coordinated with Europe in a way that Trump couldn't have to get aid over to Ukraine. He's shipped a tremendous amount of aid, like the HIMARS, that have had a tremendous effect on the battlefield and helping them recapture areas like Kherson, Kupiansk, Lyman, and a lot of territory back from the occupiers. And so I think he's done a tremendously good job. And Biden is actively aware of not crossing certain red lines drawn in the sand, and you can see it from his actions because he's even more worried about crossing those red lines than I feel that I am at times, since he's holding back on the longer range missiles, which even if I disagree with him here or there about where, if this is crossing the line or if this is not crossing the line, I will say that him being actively aware of the line is very important because I don't feel Trump was. I don't feel like he was. And from a lot of the stuff that came out about his administration and how he talked about nuclear weapons, I don't think he was at all.
Past, I think that the accomplishments he had under the coronavirus relief, I think, was really good. The passing the expanded child tax credit and everything, and then like on a kind of overarching level, like his general trying to work with both sides and not being like an extreme progressive and not trying to be like extremely far left. I think it's been pretty positive for kind of like cooling down the political discourse in the country without constantly demonizing the other side. And then we can get more specific if you want on any of those topics.
Okay. I don't necessarily know that he is tried to cool anything down. I think he's just mostly not done anything, and that has done enough because the last couple presidents have been very bad at just ramping up tensions in the country.
He's already had, what do you mean not done anything? He's had some major legislative accomplishments.
No, I'm talking about from the sense of tensions.
Okay.
Because I was focusing on that one first. But
I feel like when I speak about him like cooling things down, So I think that like the statements of like I'm not the president for the Democrats, I'm the president for all of the United States. I think his constantly trying to get like Republicans on board with legislation he's trying to pass, I think is better than just saying like we're going to do what we can with 50. We're going to do what we can through budget reconciliation. We're going to do what we can in the Senate with 51 votes, like et cetera, et cetera. I think trying to bring Republicans to the table to negotiate on stuff is something that I find admirable. But
yeah, with the infrastructure bill,
I don't know of any real secessions that secessions that he's made to Republicans at all. Like,
well, the infrastructure bill was voted
Yep.
on by there were like 16 like Senate Republicans that joined the Democrats on that bill. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
Pretty big infrastructure bill.
I hate all of those Republicans. So,
Well, of course you guys you call them all rhinos.
no, they're actual Republicans. I'm just a libertarian, like big L libertarian member
Okay.
of the Libertarian Party. They're all awful, both sides.
Okay.
But no, everything about that.
so is the Libertarian Party, fucking run by the Mises Caucus, constantly tweeting out pictures of like Hitler mustache Zelensky. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, like even the Republican Party presents itself in a more respectable manner than the Libertarians do at times. I mean, and that's saying something about the Republican Party.
Infrastructure bill was just awful. The way they increased the IRS was insane. The IRS.
What an awesome idea! How can you be against
Fantastic idea.
the increase
Yes.
of the IRS?
The IRS.
True.
It's an awful system.
I mean, the IRS is like one of, and he's about to say the same thing. The IRS is one of the few things, if you dump money into in this country, it's almost guaranteed to give us back money. The reason why there's so many people that we constantly complain about all these corrupt tax cheats, and the IRS has a reputation because the IRS doesn't have the resources to go after the corrupt tax cheats. They have the resources to go after the people, not with the piles and piles of lawyers behind them, but the working class Joe. And so they go after what they should. But people should not dodge taxes, and we should gather taxes. It's one of the things we can do. We can actively not raise taxes, pour money into it, and just make more money. Like, we need to have more IRS agents. Not to mention, the mistakes that the IRS make will probably be helped resolved if they have more staff to review this paperwork and do what the IRS does on a daily basis. We need the IRS to gather taxes. Their job is important. It's extremely important. The country would stop functioning without the IRS.
It's one of the only things that actually makes money in our government. We need more IRS agents, of
By
course.
taxing citizens and taking money from them.
That's how governments work. Yeah, you have to tax citizens to pay for the government.
They're never going to decrease taxes in any meaningful way ever.
That's not what the IRS's job is.
Wait, that's number one. That's not the IRS's job, but the government has reduced taxes. Trump reduced taxes. Reagan reduced taxes. There's been multiple presidents that's reduced taxes.
The problem with the IRS as it existed prior to that bill was that there are billions of dollars out there that the IRS knows are out there, but they don't have the agents to go after it. I think expanding the IRS is one of the only like revenue positive things where when you throw more money at it, it makes more money for the government. I feel like of all the agencies we could talk about in the U.S. government of increasing funding to the IRS is like the most obvious one.
So here's my question. Why didn't the Democrats, despite all of their rhetoric about not wanting to go after Americans under $400,000, reject the Crapo Amendment?
What was that amendment specifically?
The Crapo Amendment said that any of the new funding going towards those 87,000 new IRS agents would be not used to go under Americans with an income of less than $400,000 a year. It was proposed by a Republican. It's named after one of them, Crapo, and it was voted down on party lines by Democrats over Republicans.
I would have to see the specific language of the bill, but I don't know why you would exclude Americans earning less than $400K from the new IRS.
That was the main talking point that Democrats used to try and get the bill through public opinion.
Okay.
And they voted against it on their own practice. It was straight up just a lie across the board. About this
I wish I knew the specific language of the bill. I know that, for instance, like when you are doing audits, I know that the Republicans have required that people earning people qualifying for the EITC, I think, have to be audited at a certain percentage. It's either like 5% of like EITC earners have to be audited, which is actually a huge waste of IRS resources. So but I would have to see the specific language of the bill, but I don't know why you would hire new IRS agents and then like gimp their ability to go after certain types of income. Like I know that
again, no,
I
would actually agree with you on that sense. It makes no sense to add the IRS agents and not do that. But at the same time, that was the primary rhetoric behind getting the bill's public support, was saying that they would not go after Americans under 400,000. So everything they said about getting support for that infrastructure bill was straight up a lie, and it's a provable lie.
I would have to see the exact statements made, because I know a lot of statements get rung around in terms of like what people say they say.
Sam Harris has a talk with Timothy Snyder on Ukraine. Who's Timothy Snyder? I'm Timothy Snyder. He's an American historian. Is Is this the guy who did the Yale talk? I don't know who this guy is. I think this is the guy who did the Yale talk. I remember watching him in the Yale videos. He did like a class on Ukrainian history at Yale.
Said and what was actually agreed on, and I have to see the exact amendment, but I don't have the language of that bill in front of me, unfortunately. But
I mean that's fair.
But I mean, like, even regardless, if that was like the primary selling point, I would have said, oh well, that's kind of dumb. Like that shouldn't be the primary selling point. But I'm still like policy-wise, like in favor of expanding the IRS if that means being able to go after more tax revenue that's out there that they can't right now. They don't have the manpower to.
And again, one of my big issues on taxes is that people basically use the government uses excuses constantly to put things temporarily in place to then permanently jack them up. So a good example of this would be income tax to begin with. It was started during World War I as a temporary measure only for the richest people, and it was only 2%. Now, every single person in the middle class has to deal with an insane amount of federal income tax. And this is a serious problem that the government has across the board. They continuously use specific crises to then jack up to then jack up later federal laws that just never ever go away. I mean, the
we have expanded exactly what the government does for society when it comes to things like Social Security, policing, and what our government does. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and protecting our oceans and waters and natural land, and having, you know, people go out and do like monitoring to make sure that people are living up to code and they're not living in like shithole like apartments that are full of rats, and there's a million things that the federal government does, and those responsibilities have expanded. But I don't think you should just make the appeal to like, wow, the government's expanded, and then we're supposed to just be like, oh no, like we would need to argue that the government, if we took this role away from them, it would be better for society as a whole than just say the government expanded, because the government has expanded for many good reasons. Like after the invention of nuclear weapons, it was a good thing that the government expanded to have agencies that deal with radiation so we don't all die, right? That was a good government expansion. So we would have to go issue by issue, which is separate from the conversation that's happening here. Like about Biden, issue by issue to talk about these departments and whether they should exist or not, like ICE and others.
FDR's New Deal is a good example of this. A lot of those programs that were designed specifically for the Great Depression are still around today, despite not really providing the same benefit that they did then.
That might be the case, but I'm not here to argue in favor of like should permanent programs that now or that came about 100 years ago should or shouldn't be in place anymore. Like if there's a specific program we're going to talk about, I can talk about whether or not I defend or not defend that particular program. But like I don't think we can get rid of income tax and still have the federal government function in the way that it does right now.
Well, no, that's why we should get rid of most of the federal government.
Yeah, but I don't know anybody that's in favor of getting rid of most of the federal government.
We could start with the FBI, the ATF, and the Federal Reserve.
So how do we investigate federal crimes with no FBI?
There are...
What the fuck? This is Joshua Collins 2.0. It feels like you make like a bold, edgy statement, and then immediately, let's abolish the FBI. Okay, how do we investigate federal crimes? That's basic. That's basic. You're the one who just said you wanted to abolish it. Destiny didn't bring that up. You brought it up. You gotta have a follow-up, man. You gotta have a follow-up. This is like, you know what I'm gonna do to you if you hit on my girlfriend again? Yeah, what? Something. Like, you gotta, if you were the one that brought it up, you need to have the follow-up. Did he not think that far? Did he just think we made the FBI for one day for no reason? Okay, one second. Let me finish. Let me let him finish.
I think honestly, in a real sense, it would be a better system to get rid of all of the auxiliary investigatory agencies like the ATF, the DEA, and...
Okay, so he immediately backtracked on getting rid of the FBI immediately. Once asked who investigates the crimes. I mean, this is like, okay, this is the most basic level of like political interaction. This would be like, we should abolish the military. Okay, who protects our nation from invasion? Okay, when I said abolish the military, what I really meant is maybe we should reduce military spend. Is like, okay, well, that's a totally different statement. That's a totally different statement. Okay.
And ICE, and then combine them into a simplified agency that covers everything and on a much more limited scale. But
well, I mean, so I mean,
that would be the initial way to do it, because the current system of the FBI is horrible. The program,
horrible how? In what ways? What,
the FBI was initially designed to go after political dissidents.
Hey, don't care about initially. The libertarian arguments were like, well, 100 years ago it was like this. That's not relevant. The world has changed.
The
right?
problem is it hasn't changed. They still do this today.
What is the issue? Like you say, like the FBI is like a horrible or terrible organization. Like what is like a big change you'd want to see in the FBI?
I would like to see all of the high-level positions basically taken out. I would like them to be not a
doesn't have anything
executive agency responsible to the president. I would like to see them be responsible probably to Congress directly.
Responsible to Congress directly. Why Congress over the executive branch?
Okay, all of the executive positions, I don't like. He's just saying we need to slash their management. Okay, he didn't describe how that's gonna help. He just said we need to do that. Okay, and then it needs to be responsible to Congress. That doesn't sound too threatening to me. But we've moved over from abolish the FBI to actually just make the FBI responsible to Congress, which is totally different from the argument he was building earlier. Now it's no longer even an argument about reducing the size of the federal government, besides the fact that he says he wants to get rid of the managerial positions, not saying or describing how or why that would be good and how that would make the FBI more effective, or why that wouldn't lead to an issue if we just start cutting all the staff for these people. Just kind of says, move it over to Congress. This is no longer a discussion about reducing the size of the federal government. This is now a discussion about making the FBI basically adhere to a separate institution than it currently does.
Because the executive branch at any one time is controlled specifically by one party, whereas Congress is controlled usually by, at least in large parts, both parties.
Couldn't that argument be used to basically strip every single agency from the executive branch then and then put it over to Congress?
No. I think the biggest issue specifically with the FBI is that it can be used under Trump's administration, under Biden's administration, under Obama's administration to target political dissidents. And in that sense, as long as it is controlled specifically by one person and one party, then that can be targeted at the other party regardless.
I mean, it theoretically could be, but I mean, like, theoretically things could happen from like congressional committees as well, right? Like, it feels strange because like the legislative branch of our government already has like so much power, like they can overrule the president in several ways, that to start stripping things from the executive.
I mean, they've outsourced most of their actual job to executive agencies.
I think that, well, I mean, most of those executive agencies will be will come from like some piece of legislation in Congress that says like we're granting the president the authority to make an agent to do this, and then they kind of figure out exactly like how are they going to enforce the law. But
yes, but it should not. It was never designed that the FDA would be the ones that make laws on how drugs and food is processed. That was supposed to be Congress's job. They then outsourced that to the FDA and said we're not going to touch it. Now you have a system that makes the laws through the FDA. The FDA then investigates any breaches in those laws, and they have their own courts to justify those fines. So
well, I think every executive agency has their own. There's a name for it, like
their own courts. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and they've got their own like. It's a separate investigatory body for every federal agency. I should remember what these are called, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But those are supposed to run independent. Like anytime you hear a story where it's like watch blowers have figured out this, it's because of the office of whatever that's serving as a counterpoint to that federal agency. If there's a big problem with like the FDA, just because it exists under the executive doesn't mean that we can't change it in Congress. Like we can pass laws congressionally to change how the president is enacting certain things executively. So it seems like if there was a huge issue we had with the FDA, whether it was ran by Congress or the president, like the change would happen because if we hated it so much in Congress it would change. We'd be passing legislation already in Congress to change how the executive carries it out. No?
In theory, yes. However, I think while I think it's a good thing that Congress needs extensive debates to really do anything productive, and it intentionally slows them down, I think the way that presidents have recently been using executive orders, and this includes pretty much every single president of the 21st century, the president has found a lot of ways to sort of get around certain things. A number of executive agencies executive orders have just been.
By the way, my number one chatter in my site chat right now is named Shaved Dog Arse. One of my most devoted viewers. He says, governments invented nuclear weapons just to create regulatory agencies to justify an increase in taxation and a reduction in individual liberties. True, you figured it out. I'm hitting the Benjamin, going to Blinkerton City. I don't know what you're talking about.
Awful, and
I'm a Christian man.
Borderline unconstitutional, honestly.
Sure, but well, we say borderline unconstitutional, but I mean the Supreme Court's there to check any challenges that come through. It feels like your problem is less with the organization of the government, that these executive agencies exist at the behest of the president, and your issue is more like these agencies ever existing at all. Like I have a feeling that
that's
if the
part
FDA
of it, yes.
and the FBI existed under Congress, you'd still be like, well, we still need to abolish them because I don't like the FDA and the FBI. Right?
Well, yes, but I have an entire rant about drug laws and why the FDA is awful on that front. But
Sure, but I mean, they'd be just as awful if they were under
but I
Congress,
think,
right?
what I'm saying is, I think it would be less bad there. And I'm not here to. I am not here like. Ideally, I would be an anarchist and like in ideals. I hate everything that the government has done so far. But I also recognize the practicality that's just
everything. I'm sorry, like this is delusional. Like everything the government's done, everything. What about like hurricane response, like natural disaster response? Firemen. When we had private firefighters, that sucked. Firefighters just getting fist fights over who's gonna hose down the house. There's been instances where people didn't get their house saved by firefighters because they just didn't have the money. Like that's bad. It's good that the government does that. Law enforcement, it's had a lot of problems with law enforcement in this country, but private law enforcement is a terrifying idea. That kind of Wild West attitude is not something I want to bring back in this country. There's a million things that the government does, and the government does well, or the government does better than the private option would.
Never going to happen, and it wouldn't just work for the vast majority of people. So I'm willing to stand here and be.
Look. Maybe I'm biased because I came from a family where both of the people who raised me were government employees. One worked for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. He made those Benjamins that fueled the Inflation Reduction Act. He actually was a machinist on that, and the other was a government cook. But like maybe it's just because I live in D.C. But there's a lot of pride from government workers for the service they provide to the nation, especially in this area, in the D.C. area. So I just like the idea, like, oh, everything the government's ever done. Like, yeah, okay, let me see the private paved roads. Do you think they're gonna go through all the communities that the government paved roads did? Like, oh, let's see the private firemen. How did they work? How did that go? What about private security instead of police force? Why does most nations in the world not govern themselves by libertarian principles, but have all seemed to come to the conclusion that you do need somewhat of a strong central government to function well as a country? There doesn't seem to be any country in the world that doesn't have that. But why is that? Is it just because all of the nations in the world have been tricked at the same time? All the way from Iran to Russia to China to the United States to the UK to France to Poland to Germany to Switzerland. Everyone was tricked. I just feel that a lot of libertarians live in an alternative world, a fantasy. And I don't say that with hatred towards libertarians, okay? I say that out of love, in the same way I would tell a small child that Santa Claus isn't real. So, okay, that was a little mean, but deserved.
And say that we should not make perfection the enemy of progress. And I think that while I would like to, yes, just abolish the FDA outright, it would be better to put a lot of these executive agencies more directly under the legislative authority as opposed to the executive.
Gotcha, I understand. I don't really think it would change any of the problems because we already have the ability for the legislative to vote on different things for those executive authorities to do. But I guess backing out. So what does this have to do with Joe Biden? Sounds like you just hate the government.
Partially, yes. But no. Actually, I think my biggest issue of Joe Biden is his foreign policy.
Oh, dude. Okay, somebody brought up the line in chat. Somebody said in gutter chat, which you will never see on stream because gutter chat doesn't deserve to be on the screen. That's the normal Twitch chat. That's normal, Twitch chat. We got site chat at DylanBurns.tv. Go to DylanBurns.tv and join the community, sub, donate, help the channel, get a lovely orange name, maybe even a yellow name in my chat. But somebody in chat gutter chat brought up the libertarians are house cats meme. We said this on the channel a while ago. But the libertarians are house cats meme is basically the idea that libertarians are best described as house cats, that they're dependent on a system they don't appreciate or understand completely, but they lash out against it constantly.
But no, actually, I think my biggest issue of Joe Biden is his foreign policy. I have always been a big stickler for foreign policy, and it's one of, in my opinion, the most important jobs of the president. Less so approving what Congress passes, less so the executive orders. His primary job should be to be America's face to the world and to run the military and our foreign policy effectively. Okay. And I don't see situations in which Joe Biden has done that effectively. I think he royally fucked up the
I would say Ukraine is like a great example I can point to as an achievement. And I think him as a libertarian, I would have to give credit. A lot of presidents promised to end the war in Afghanistan. Biden was the only one who delivered on it, even if the pullout wasn't perfect. And I would also compare that to the other person who has done pullouts before, in Donald Trump and in what happened in Syria. That was a massive mess. So I have no really reason to believe that this pullout managed by Donald Trump would have been better. I think it was nobody expected the ANA to collapse that quickly. There wasn't really a plan for the ANA to collapse that quickly. Intelligence had told the president that he had months when he only had weeks, and the intelligence was wrong, and then they had to deal with the fallout of that. I don't think Trump's intelligence would have been any better, and so I think he would have gone into the same stumbling blocks. I think the only difference between the Biden withdrawal and the Trump withdrawal most likely would have been the fact that we probably would have gotten less of our allies out, because I doubt the person who talked about doing the Muslim ban on the campaign trail is going to be that hyped to give a lot of people a pass when they're desperately trying to crawl out of the country so they don't get slaughtered by the government, by the new Taliban government.
Pull out in Iran.
In Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, yes. And
how? Why do you say that?
He actually pushed back Donald Trump's date to pull out by 3 months. The reason that we did it at the beginning of summer is because terrorist activities go down in that area during the summer because it's hotter, and so there's less activity just in general. And he wanted.
The reason why he pushed it back is that Donald Trump's timeline did not give the American government enough time to try to get the ANA ready to deal with the threat. What the 3 months showed us is that there was basically nothing we could do, and we pulled out anyway. But I don't think the result would have been different if we pulled out 3 months earlier or 3 months later. I think the ANA would have similarly had a same collapse no matter what. I don't think they would have held up against the onslaught no matter what. They were just not prepared. They collapsed so quickly that it's hard for me. Even the Taliban was surprised at how fast they collapsed. So just changing it by 3 months or making it so he pulled out 3 months earlier does not make me think that the conditions of the withdrawal would have fundamentally changed just because the weather would have been different.
One of these specific
is because the problem isn't that, oh, they just needed a little bit more strength to hold out. They completely collapsed at any pressure. And that's not saying there weren't brave individual soldiers in the ANA. There absolutely were, and they're good guys. But the thing is, the government was just not prepared for it. And so changing the weather from hot to cold, cold to hot, that doesn't, I don't think that changes the fundamentals of the conflict at all when it comes to whether they could deal with any pressure or not. I think it could have been summer and they would have collapsed, or it could have been winter.
Specific date of 9/11 to be the day that pulls out for whatever reason, most likely just because it looks really nice on paper. The problem is that when he does pull out, he doesn't do any of the proper planning. He doesn't actually take any effort to inform the government that this is happening. We leave a number of our allies behind in the area without any warning whatsoever. Our military.
I cannot defend not telling the ANA that we were withdrawing from certain military bases, or the fact that we didn't bring out more people. Both of these criticisms, though, I think again fall upon the fact that the government was not prepared for the ANA to collapse that quickly, and then was kind of left picking up the pieces. We did have a plan to withdraw. It's just we didn't have a plan to withdraw if the ANA government collapsed that quickly. And neither, I think, Trump would have. But it is a deserved criticism towards how the Biden administration handled it. Because once the rubber hit the road, they still got a ton of people out, which should be commended. But they did make some mistakes.
Military bases get overrun, and a large number of our heavy machinery and heavy weaponry ends up in the hands of the people who immediately put a coup in Afghanistan.
So I understand some of the complaints about the Afghanistan pullout. I think it was done as well as it could have been. I know that there are a lot of people that get really triggered by it, but I think the issue is that we've already been in Afghanistan for over.
Oh no, I'm with you that we should never have been there to begin
and people
with.
talk about well, we could have prepared the government better. How? We dumped tens of billions. Was it $1 trillion in Afghanistan? It was a huge number of money that we poured into Afghanistan. Yeah, I don't think that another year would have helped. I don't think another 6 months would have helped. I don't think that I don't think at that point, I don't think there was anything else we could have done.
But we should never have had our allies waking up the day of trying to figure out what the hell is going on because we're just leaving.
I mean, all of these timelines were already on the table that we were going to be heading out. Like, maybe people just didn't believe it because, like, well, no, America will stay here forever. But I think at some point, I mean, like, I think we have to leave the country. We can't be there for till
you
the
had
time.
Biden on television saying this will not be like our exit of Vietnam. And literally, we were helicoptering people off of the embassies exactly like he said we would not be doing. He did not properly plan what he was pulling out.
There were a few people that were helicoptering.
The problem, it wasn't the fact that he did not properly plan for withdrawal. He did, but he planned for a different situation, as Trump would have as well, because nobody expected the ANA government to collapse that quickly. We were planning for a withdrawal, a kind of peaceful withdrawal with the ANA government holding, but they didn't. It collapsed immediately.
Of embassies, but at the end of the day, how many Americans died?
I believe no Americans died.
Yeah.
But
Americans
are not the only people.
By the way, that's not true. 13 Americans died. This is I don't know why Destiny says this, and I don't know why the Libertarian agrees to it. They both didn't do the research. 13 Americans died in an ISIS bombing.
That would matter here.
But it was 13 soldiers.
We have allies in that nation that did.
Yeah, but then what was the alternative? Like, do you because do we start giving warnings ahead of time? So like, you guys all need to leave the country, and then you cripple the ANI even more, and then it's like.
You should. What you should have done is slowly pulled out over time, taken a third, then half, and slowly decrease the amount of power over time, while making sure that they're filling that power vacuum instead of just removing the power vacuum entirely.
That's what they were. That's exactly what they were attempting to do. What he described was the plan for the pullout. It's just the government was unable to hold up.
Well, but I don't think the ANI had everything they needed. Like that, I don't think that there was ever going to be a drawdown that made them able to sustain against like the Taliban. Even if we would have left a third, a half, or whatever. And I think the scary part there, from Biden's point of view, and I think it's easy to look at it retroactively. This is what I look at, I guess, when I try to figure out was it good or not. We got everybody out. There were some deaths. It sucks, but for the most part, it was relatively peaceful.
We actually did not get everybody out.
We've gotten almost every American out. There's like
the CIA intentionally said that there were over 200 Americans left in Iraq.
Initially there was, but I'm pretty sure at this point, because I checked this like 6 months ago, I think every American.
Let me be clear. When they say we haven't gotten them all out, at this point you can get out of Afghanistan. There are people who are traveling to Afghanistan as tourists at this point. You can get out of Afghanistan. This isn't a problem anymore.
That wanted to leave us out of Afghanistan.
As long as you're not like an Afghan loyalist and you're talking about like American citizens, you can get out at this point.
I also just would not take what they say at face value.
Okay, we can take another step, but then at the end of the day, we can just go by gut. But I think that the problem is that, like, the thing is, we got everybody out, and we're gone, and we're done. But if we would have done these other strategies, retrospectively, we look at it and we go like, oh, well, he could have done this, could have done. If we would have, like, drawn down troops, less people there, slowly done it, like, let's say 6 months from now, we still have a few people there, the force is way smaller, something happens, the Taliban attacks, or there's a terrorist attack, and now, like, and now, hold on, and then now, like, 20 Americans are killed. Now we're in the United States, like, oh my God, we need to go back and we need to get revenge. Now there's another troop surge, now you're there for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Like, why risk it?
We would have
actually what Destiny is describing did happen. Like we 13 soldiers died. So I mean, we're talking about a hypothetical that already happened. It wasn't really the 6 months extension, but it did happen.
We should have done the pullout at the beginning of summer. Like that is just like it would have been better to do it then. I don't know why it was pushed back 3 months in the excuse of planning.
The reason why is because what he's talking about, they were trying to do with the extra 3 months. They were trying to get the ANA prepared.
To then not improve the plan at all.
I guess it's just a matter of like how well could it have ever gone. I don't think there's ever us leaving Afghanistan 100% and it looking like super nice in all ways. Like it's always going to be like pretty shitty because like that government was never going to be able to stand on its own against the Taliban, getting support from so many other people in the region.
I mean, to an extent, yes. I unfortunately, I do agree with you in the fact that there is no way this could have ever gone well in that sense, because once you're there, it's already a problem.
And I understand that there are lives besides Americans that are worth considering, of course. But from a foreign policy point of view, when Americans start dying, we start turning our eyes, towards other countries and they get red. And like, if there would have been another attack, if we would have stayed even a little bit longer and there would have been another attack and like 20 or 30 American soldiers would have been killed, Jesus, we're not leaving.
But the thing is, we did. We like 13 soldiers died and we still left.
After that.
Like this is going to be a really good argument if 13 soldiers did not die during the withdrawal.
Now we're going to recommit.
There had been no fighting for the last 2 years. There had been a ceasefire.
Sure, but I think that was because we were under the understanding after the Doha agreements that the United States would be pulling out.
Yes.
And I think that's why the Taliban was like pretty chill and that's probably why they didn't attack, because they knew we were leaving. And the Taliban doesn't want us there forever, obviously, because they want to take control of the country. Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, again, if you had done this at the beginning of summer, you would have given.
I don't know how they both don't know that 13 soldiers died during the withdrawal. I don't know how. Like, I feel like the Libertarians should know this, and I feel like Destiny should totally know this. Earlier, when Destiny said no soldiers died, he was referring to the embassy. Is Dylan not the airport? I don't know what you're saying. But if he's saying, it feels like Destiny forgore, right, man? It's forgore. Now, you guys don't know about this? Also, I saw somebody spamming emotes to get back at site chat. They're still at site chat, okay? They're still at site chat, okay? This is like a kid in the gutter saying like, well, you guys don't have the game of ball and stick, you rich kids, that us poor kids do. I mean, they can just go get a ball and stick. They're still at site chat. You know? What were we? Yeah. The Afghanistan bombing. Afghanistan, American soldiers killed. Bombing. Yeah, you just looked this up. Yeah. A year ago, 13 Marines, more than 100 Afghans died when a bomb exploded at the Kabul airport. This was in August. This is not August. This was a year ago, like during the withdrawal. Like so American soldiers did die during the withdrawal.
At least the government of Afghanistan a modicum more amount of time to just get their feet on the ground before getting overrun.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, what was it, like 2 weeks, I think, and like
it was a day. It was like a day.
Okay, yeah. So like, I mean, I don't know, maybe, but
and then
it's hard to like retroactively go back and say he should have. Like, all I see is that we got
somebody in chat's like, the left is the party of not knowing anything. Color me shocked. First off, the left isn't a party, okay? That's a political like alignment. That's the first thing. Second, the reason I brought this up as somebody who's on the left was because the Libertarian and Destiny didn't know that. So how is this the left's fault when I'm the one bringing up the whatever? We'll have a chat being chat.
Oh, no American deaths. Like, some people died. It sucked, but I mean, like, that it was. At least we're finally out of Afghanistan. Jesus.
Yeah, and then I also do believe that the view that Biden has on the world stage hurts our figure in the first place.
In what ways, or in what?
So I would say this: in 2012, we back a coup in Ukraine that overthrows a Russian-backed government. That's what.
That didn't. Okay. There it is. There it is, boys. There it is. Dinner time. Dinner time. Hit the dinner time bell. Ding, 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 ding. Hit it, hit it, hit it. There's the nonsense. Here we go. Okay, first off, it wasn't 2012. It was 2014. I think he's referring to, when he says coup, is the Euromaidan. We did not organize a coup. The CIA didn't do anything like that. Protesters protested against the government because Yanukovych pulled out of the association agreement after caving to Russian economic coercion when they tried to stop Ukrainian trucks from leaving Ukraine to engage in trade with Russia, even though Russia was a massive trade partner for Ukraine. After he caves and pulls out of the association agreement, which would have allowed Ukrainians visa-free travel to Europe, would have allowed Ukrainians to move throughout Europe, and they would have agreed to certain labor regulations, and would have been a huge economic boom for Ukrainians. That happens, so the government, the people, respond to the government by protesting. They go out in Euromaidan Square, they go out on Maidan Square, and they protest against him pulling out of the association agreement, which he had promised that he was going to stay in. It was actually a campaign promise he made during the 2012 election that he would support the association agreement. That was a lie. He didn't. So people are protesting against him. Then the government responds to that. Yanukovych responds to that by beating the protesters very brutally. People then get angry at the protesters getting beaten brutally, and more people get out there with cars and in mass movements with signs and helmets, and they get ready to protest against the government, and they're protesting against the government. Government responds by sending Tutushki hired thugs after them to stab them, by sending the Berkut special police, which have been accused of things like racketeering, torture, horrific police abuses. They send them in. The Berkut then murders protesters. The Tutushki murders protesters. Over 100 people die in the protest, the heavenly 100. And then Yanukovych is trying to outlaw protesting. Outlaw it. That is when Yanukovych was negotiating with the protesters. Negotiations fail, and he flees the country. That was done by the people of Ukraine, not the CIA. How did the CIA back it? How did we do it? Is it just because we said, oh yeah, it's good that you're protesting against police violence? If that is it, if that's the evil thing that we backed, that's a good thing to do. It's good to call out police violence. It's good to call out the country trying to make a government trying to make protesting illegal. It's good to call out these things. We didn't back it in any sustainable way. You make it sound like we organized a coup. We didn't. We supported protesters verbally. That's basically it.
Wait,
that's
no
how Zelensky.
shot. That's not what happened.
That's how Zelensky came to power.
God, he's so clueless. Not only is that not how Zelensky came to power, but after Yanukovych ran away, it wasn't Zelensky that ended up getting power. After an election, Petro Poroshenko came to power. Petro Poroshenko, who at one point was part of Yanukovych's party. Then, after another election in 2019, Petro Poroshenko lost to Zelensky, and then Zelensky took power on a pro-peace platform. So, I mean, look, this guy has no clue what he's talking about. He's gotten every fact wrong. It wasn't in 2012, it was in 2014. It wasn't a coup, and that's not how Zelensky came to power.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Why is he so adamant? How can he be so confident when he knows so little?
First of all, it's 2014, not 2012. But no.
No, because Crimea fell in 2014, which was a response to the 2012 Zelensky coming to power.
No.
What is he saying? What is he saying? He's completely clueless. What does that even mean? Zelensky came to power in 2019. What is he saying? He came to power way later. In 2012, Yanukovych, the person who fled the country after the protests in 2014, he was reelected in 2012. In 2014, and a response to the protests that happened in 2014 after Yanukovych fled the country, once the Russians realized that their boy had been kicked out and had ran away, that's when they invaded Crimea, so they could have dominion over it for both Russian nationalist reasons and strategic reasons, because they wanted access to the port. But that was all in 2014. He lacks any knowledge about this conflict.
Oh, in 2014, Crimea happened in response to oh my God, Yanukovych being ousted from the country in 2014.
Oh, I thought that happened in 2012.
No, it was 2014. Okay. But the Euromaidan protests and then eventually the revolution that happened. Firstly, people always point to this idea that there was like a U.S. coup in Ukraine.
No, backed coup. There's a difference.
What's the difference? What's the difference? Distinct the difference. How did we do it?
Ukrainians were protesting for a long time for a lot of reasons. Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in the world prior to 2014.
It's still one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
I don't know if I'd say as much as it was prior to 2014.
Not as much, but it's still one of the most corrupt.
Listen, they're in a war. Okay?
You could make China 100% better country, and it's still one of the worst countries in the world.
I don't know if I would say that. I'm just saying that
the Ukraine is not comparable to China. Where is these comparisons coming from?
For the evidence that there was a U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine is non-existent. I don't think there's any evidence to point to the fact that the U.S. backed the coup.
The U.S. gave the rebels resources. That's the U.S. backing the rebels.
What is he talking about? What resources? What resources? There were no rebels. What the fuck is he talking about? What rebels? It was a protest movement. It was a protest movement. That would be like calling a BLM protester a rebel. Like, okay, are we really gonna say that we didn't? Number one, there were no rebels. There was no armed rebellion. Okay, there was protests. Eventually, got too heated for Yanukovych, failed in negotiations, fled the country. Two, we didn't give them any resources. What resources did we give them? Like, you could say that NGOs might have provided like medical gauze, maybe. Like there was some doctors on the street that was like bandaging up people. You could like maybe like there was NGOs that were funded that were anti-corruption stuff, but that wasn't even tied directly to the like what does he mean? What resources did we give? What resources that you think justifies us saying it was a US backed coup, as if we basically gave them all the guns and money to overthrow the government?
No.
Yes.
No. There were no rebels in 2014. They were just protesters. They were the Euromaidan protesters. There weren't like official rebel groups to like give arms or weapons to.
This is not how historians usually view revolutions. I mean, at some
What is he talking about? You can't cite historians and be wrong about everything.
point, we don't. When we talk about the Boston Massacre, we usually refer to them as the American revolutionaries, not the American protesters. But at that time, they were just protesters.
Sure.
They were just protesters. If you're going to talk about this actually, yes, we're not going to call them American... whatever. Okay, whatever. Let's let Destiny respond. I'm already yelling too much.
I'm just saying that, like, the reason why Yanukovych was ousted happened after the... I always fuck the name of it. It's the Yellow Jacket Police started, like, shooting at protesters, and people started to get, obviously, really mad, because that was, like, the culmination of all the protests. Once police were firing on protesters, and people started to get really mad, Yanukovych fled the country. And that, like, none of that needed U.S. support. There were no, like, U.S. arms flowing into the country with like tons of fighting with the government. None of that was happening. I've never seen any evidence presented that like it's a U.S. backed coup. There's not like a ton of like freedom fighters on the ground. It's not like Syria or something.
No,
There's
it's
a ton
not.
of people shooting and killing each other. Like it was 1 or 2 relatively violent days that ended up with Yanukovych fleeing the country.
And yes, when your active government flees the country and a new regime comes to power, that is a coup.
Well, they call it a revolution, but
it just depends on which side you support. That's the only difference on what those words are.
Sure, it might be, but I'm
Okay, but the Ukrainian side was correct. Don't murder protesters and don't outlaw protesting. Like, I think as a libertarian, he would agree with that. Come on.
I mean, I'm going to probably support the side of the people that are trying to get representation of their government and not the guy that's trying to enact laws to violently oppress freedom of speech and not having his police officers shooting on protesters
and
I
agree
not ignoring
with
the
you.
will of their parliament.
And I agree with you that they are that those protesters would be in the right. But what happens is because the U.S. Supports them, and we now end up with a large amount of influence and ties to this country with Joe Biden and his son on the board of Burisma, which
What is he do? He doesn't know anything. He is so confident, but he doesn't know shit. How is he actually? Why is he even talking about it? Why did he bring it up? He brought up the topic. What is he talking about? Dude, the reason we have influence, we've been giving billions of dollars to aid to Ukraine way before Biden was in office and way before Biden was even vice president or before Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. We had given billions of dollars to aid that had to deal with like drug trafficking and border patrol and to try to stop human trafficking and deal with corruption. Like there was a million different, we had ties to Ukraine ever since the end of the Cold War. It's just Russia also had ties to Ukraine, and then Russia burnt their ties through their behavior towards the state of Ukraine. Ukraine then shifts towards the West. The protesters viewed liberal democracy and the path forward with Europe as more beneficial than a path forward with Russia, and that's why they made a Western turn. And but then we had more and more influence. But this wasn't due to Burisma. There is no evidence that anything that occurred on Burisma influenced American foreign policy towards Ukraine whatsoever. There's no evidence.
Board of Burisma has nothing to do with how Ukraine runs its policies. And also,
no, the
again,
country is incredibly corrupt, and Burisma is a major country that has ties in huge parts of their.
What? It's not what? It's not a country. It was a company that no longer even exists. I don't. It doesn't even exist anymore, and it's not a country.
The United States did not back any part of the revolution. There was no financial money flowing into like rebel groups. There was no U.S. arms flowing into that country. Like, it just didn't happen. There were plenty of reasons for those people to be protesting.
Burisma doesn't even exist anymore. Am I right in that? I don't even think it exists anymore. Burisma, like, I think Burisma's gone. Like, I can't go to like Burisma. Is it Burisma? Is it still exist? Maybe I'm wrong. I think it might actually still exist. I thought it doesn't exist anymore. Either way, it's not a country. Does it still exist? Operations. Okay, I do think it actually still exists. I thought actually it was gone now. No, guess not. It is owned by. Oh yeah, it still exists. Okay.
We know why Yanukovych fled the country.
No, just because.
And also, even if
again,
this was
that's
the
not
case,
mutually exclusive to them, to the U.S. Giving support to these people.
What do you mean by support? I mean, like, I think on TV where we're saying like we back the Ukrainian people, I think there's some of that was going on, but like there weren't like arms flowing into the country or anything like that.
No, we did help Zelensky get into power.
No, we didn't. He doesn't have any idea what he's saying.
He was voted on. They voted for him.
Before Zelensky, there was no legitimate election in that country for
yes, there was.
Good 20 years.
What the fucking Poroshenko? What do you mean?
Why would Zelensky's be all of a sudden?
It was Revolution Poroshenko, then Zelensky versus Poroshenko, and then Zelensky beat Poroshenko, the incumbent. Then they had a peaceful transfer of power because they're a democracy, a flawed democracy, but a democracy nonetheless.
Hold on. I don't know if I'd say there's no legitimate election, but I don't even think Zelensky was the first president that came after the 2014 revolution. There was still, I think, a couple years before he was elected.
Poroshenko, please.
But the idea, what is the implication? That the United States, like, propped him up and put him into power? Or that there wasn't an actual election in Ukraine to vote Zelensky into office?
No. So I was actually kind of saying this as an explanation of just America's problematic history of interfering in Ukraine.
We don't have a problematic whatever.
And
he's given no evidence.
Propping up Zelensky in the even after he came to power. But
what do you mean we propped him up? He won an election. He won an election against Poroshenko, the guy who actually got into power after Yanukovych fled, who got into power in a democratic election. What does he mean? What does he mean? What problematic history? You've given no evidence for anything. He's gotten every basic fact about this wrong.
We never quite got there. And so the idea is just when we have such important ties in keeping this country in the state that it is already, when Russia starts to come into Crimea, all of this is in response to a major change of power in that region. And
yeah, Russia going into Crimea was definitely because of Yanukovych fleeing,
and
for
it's
sure.
Western support of Ukraine that makes him see Ukraine as a real threat.
Well, hold on. Where does Russia get the right to invade Crimea?
They don't.
So if Ukraine wants to be more Western aligned than Eastern aligned, doesn't Ukraine have the right to make that choice?
In one sense, yes. In another sense, not everything that people want is necessarily what's good for the world. So
what's good for the world is what your bully on your border wants for you? Like Russia gets to dictate Ukrainian foreign policy?
So yes and no. So Ukraine should never have joined the EU or NATO simply because...
Well, they're not...
They never did, number one. And why shouldn't they join the EU? I can at least understand NATO. But the EU, you were literally saying Ukrainians need to stay poorer and they don't need to be able to take advantage of things like visa-free travel, which are obviously benefiting people in Poland and all across the European Union. They shouldn't do that because that economic would make Russia sad, because then they're not able to make Ukraine basically subserve themselves to Russian economic interests. What we're saying is Ukraine needs to permanently make itself the victim of Russian economic and military coercion when it comes to its economic policy. It is ridiculous.
Not in the EU or NATO, but they're
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They do want to be a part of both, though.
Well, I mean, I can understand why, because everybody's getting invaded. It's not.
But here's the thing, though, is if they had never fallen into the Western sphere of influence, they would never have been invaded by Russia, and that would never have threatened any sort of conflict between NATO and Russia.
I mean, like, and if Poland would have handed over Danzig, could World War II been avoided? Probably not, but I mean, there's a small chance. But does that mean Poland should hand over Danzig? There's just because things could have maybe possibly went differently. Not to mention the idea that, well, maybe if they just subserve themselves more to Russia. What if Ukraine doesn't want to subserve themselves to Russia? Do they need to subserve themselves to Russia just so Ukrainians don't die? They're the ones that are going to feel the repercussions of them dying, so they're the ones who can make determination about them going this way in foreign policy. Not to mention, if we secede to these types of demands of we will just destroy you if you don't give us everything you have, if you don't, secede to our economic interests, if you don't get rid of your Ukrainian identity, then isn't this just going to encourage behavior like this in the future as well? Isn't this going to tell other people, like, yeah, you can invade other countries, you can, like, bully them and force them to subserve to your economic interests, and the world just can't do anything. The world is just weak and unaware and too weak-willed, and, the end of human development is us just not caring when horrific invasions happen. Like, this would suck if this is the end of human development. It's just still... nation states can just threaten other nation states with invasion if they don't serve their economic interests. That's bad. That's very bad. My goodness, man.
But there are people wanted to join the Western sphere of influence. People would rather have the deal on the table was a free market access to the European Union's trade union, or it was joining a customs tariff union with this Eurasian empire of Belarus and Russia. I think the Ukrainian people have a right to look west rather than to have Daddy Russia dictate to them.
Again, they do, but that doesn't mean that we have the right. That doesn't mean that necessarily we have the duty to accomplish that.
We
don't. We don't know. So it might not be good for us to want that either.
Well, sure.
But number one, it is good for us. It is good for us to have 44 million more consumers buying American goods and European goods because we have deep economic relationships in the transatlantic alliance. So I do think it would be good for us, number one, if we want to look at this from a selfish point of view, but it's also ideologically good. It's good that they're moving towards liberal democracy instead of authoritarianism. It is good that they're moving towards a more economically prosperous future because we want the people of Ukraine to have a good future and to dictate their own independence. It's also good for Ukraine to be a sovereign state able to defend itself and pushing off occupiers who are raping, pillaging, murdering, slaughtering, filling mass graves, committing endless war crimes, occupying and annexing land. That's bad for the world order, that's bad for stability, that's bad for everyone.
I think we can support the right to self-determination of the Ukrainian people.
In a sense, yes, but we also have the right to self-determination. So if we look at this and say, if you aligning with us causes a war in your region, that's not good for us, that's not good for you.
So then you're actually asking us to coup people that we disagree with.
No, I'm saying we shouldn't have supported them in any way whatsoever to begin with. If they want to have...
Man, so our role in the world is just like, man, you want to be our friend? Well, somebody else doesn't like that, so you're not allowed. You can't trade with us. You can't have visa-free travel. You can't do any of these things because somebody else would be angry. So you're not allowed to dictate your own foreign policy. Russia is your daddy. You're their bitch. That's just how the world works. That is what we're going to say instead of asserting Ukrainian sovereignty. We give up Ukrainian democracy because it would be bad for us somehow if we have more trade partners because it makes Russia angry. Like, what?
Have that conflict on their own. They're out. It's kind of one of these things where history sucks. Oh, people get invaded constantly.
No,
and
hold on.
you
That's
have to
not a
deal
good.
with
We
it.
have the ability to do something. We can't just say history. That's like walking next to a pool.
If
And
you
you
want
see
to
a
say we have
3-year-old
the
fall in,
ability
and
to
you're
do
like, oh, well,
something,
sucks. Some people drown.
If you
Like,
want to say we have the ability to do something, you're effectively pushing for what will turn into a major war with Russia.
No, it won't. You can limit our involvement as Biden has done. Biden has limited our involvement to aid. Russia doesn't want to expand the war. Russia's getting its ass clapped right now. And you think they're going to want to expand the war to all of NATO? Russia does not want any opportunity possible to be taken that would have them fighting America. If they can't beat Ukraine, they're going to beat America, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, France, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, the UK, like all these countries. They're gonna Italy. They're gonna be all these Romania, man. All these countries. They're gonna be all of them when they can't even beat Ukraine. Why would they don't want a war with us? So we can limit our involvement because if we were to get more involved, that would be a disaster for Russia. And the only two outcomes of that would be the world blowing up in nuclear war or Russia losing. There's no outcome where they win that war, so they don't want to push it to have NATO and the rest of us in the war. That's the strength of collective defense, right? So I don't understand why there's this fear. Like if we do any support to Ukraine, oh, the world's just going to explode. We've had these types of things happen before, whether it was Soviet assistance to the Vietnamese or our assistance to the Mujahideen, and this is much more moral than many of the things we have assisted with in the past. There's not a moral objection to it, but this idea that the world's just going to explode if we support Ukraine is ridiculous fear mongering, to be quite frank. Manishay, thank you so much for the Prime Gaming being sub for 6 months on a 4-month streak. I like how great and wise writer Tolkien predicted the existence of Mordor and orcs. Oh my goodness. Dude, I know a lot of people, I talk to people about the orc comment because people sometimes say, Dylan, you hear Ukrainians sometimes call the Russian soldiers orcs. Don't you think it's a little racist? And I ask that to Ukrainians, and every time they tell me, like, we call them orcs because we love Tolkien, and they're the evil invader, and we're the victim. Like, it's not a race thing. It's like, okay, got you. I don't know. That's what I keep getting told. And they're genuine when they tell me that.
if it does, that's Russia's choice. Russia's the invader.
No, but it doesn't have to be our war. That's
no,
the problem.
we could just let Ukraine get invaded and taken over, and then all of Europe was like, well, the U.S.
But
sucks,
they wouldn't
so.
have been invaded and taken over had they stayed a neutral country.
No.
No. People say this. Had they stayed neutral, Russia did not want. Russia's goal isn't for Ukraine to be neutral. That's fucking ridiculous. You're literally just buying the Russians' lie. The Russians want Ukraine to be aligned with them. Russia's state, and you can listen to Russian state media, right? Don't believe me. Listen to the Russians when they're not trying to serve you nonsense. Listen to their own state media. They're constantly saying Ukraine can only exist as a part of Russia. That they're not Ukrainians. That is a disease of the mind. Direct quote from Dmitry Medvedev, former president of the Russian Federation, right-hand man of Putin. It is a disease of the mind. The Ukrainian language is fake. Their culture is fake. They are Russians in denial, and that Ukraine, by its very nature, must be part of Russia. The destiny of Novorossiya must be fulfilled, right? Their ideology isn't, oh, Ukraine can just be neutral. That's the goal they achieve first, Ukrainian neutrality, then Ukrainian subjugation, because that's what they were seeking in 2014. Because they were telling them, you cannot enter the association agreement. I don't care if your people want it, Ukraine. I don't care if your president agreed to do it. I don't care if the Europeans are fine with it. All I care is it doesn't serve Russian economic interests, so we're going to block your trucks from leaving Ukraine until you pull out of the association agreement. Yanukovych then pulls out of the association agreement, Euromaidan starts. That wasn't Russia seeking neutrality, that was Russia seeking Ukrainian subjugation. They wanted them to join their economic agreement. So this isn't even a question of Ukrainian neutrality. The Russians don't want neutrality. They can tell you that. They'll tell you that on TV. That's not what they want. That's not what they've acted towards in the last 8 years. That's not what they say to the domestic audience on Russian state television. It's not what they ideologically believe. Just listen to Putin's speeches. It isn't a request for Ukrainian neutrality. It's a request for Ukrainian annihilation, the annihilation of the idea of Ukrainianness and the absorption of Ukraine into Russian power structures. So no, they don't want neutrality. It's not even a conversation about neutrality. I know a lot of people try to make it the dynamic that, oh, we could just pledge neutrality and everything will be fine. That offer was made. It was made in private by Olaf Scholz before the war. He said 30 years they would not join NATO. Russia had already guaranteed. They had already guaranteed that Ukraine couldn't join NATO as long as they had a territorial dispute over Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk, which they had. Because you could not join NATO as long as you have a territorial dispute. Ukraine was no closer to joining NATO than they were 5 years ago. But he invaded. Because he didn't just want neutrality. He wanted their subjugation.
They wouldn't have been invaded and taken over if they would have let Yanukovych toss the deal that their parliament already voted on, and instead made Ukraine subservient to Russian foreign trade policy.
Like, you don't have to do either.
They did. That was what Yanukovych did. That's why people were protesting so much, because Yanukovych said, "Nah, I don't want to do this."
The problem is, and this is the history that I don't think Destiny or he knows, is that let's say Yanukovych didn't do that, then the result would have been 25% of Ukraine's trade immediately ending. Russia was using coercion, which they pledged not to do in the Budapest Memorandum when Ukraine gave up its arsenal. People talk about the Budapest Memorandum when it comes to Ukraine's territorial integrity all the time. What is less talked about is in there, it also says you cannot use economic coercion against Ukraine. They pledged not to do it, but immediately when Ukraine made an economic deal that was not beneficial to them and did not subserve themselves to Russian economic interests, boom, they try to smash 25% of Ukrainian trade, just stopping it from leaving. Just stopping it from leaving Ukraine. So the first shot was fired by Russia. It was that economic coercion, and then the invasion of Crimea, and that's something I don't think either of these guys know. Not as an insult, just as an insult to the guy on the left, but I just don't think of Russia. I mean, Putin. I mean, fucking Destiny knows.
You think actually? I'm gonna go.
But again, if the protesters in that country do want to have their protest, they want to get a new government in place, and they end up having that,
and they did.
They did.
And then Russia invaded Crimea afterwards and started a civil war in the Donbass.
But again, Russia taking over one part of it does not mean that we then have to get involved. We don't have to be as...
Yeah, we don't
have to, but we should.
We don't have to play the same game that they're doing. We don't have to be as bad as they are.
Well, I mean, you kind of have to take a stand, though, right? You can't, like, we're the strongest country in the world. If we see another country being invaded in Europe, right? I think it's everybody's kind of looking to the...
We don't have any treaties with Ukraine. We have no response.
It's not about
to support
treaties
them.
with Ukraine. It's about the general state of security across all of Europe, right?
That's what the treaties are for.
No, but there's also an ideology at play as well. Like, NATO and the European Union are all looking to the United States to take leadership, to take point on, like, hey, Russia is invading countries.
Maybe they should take leadership in their own corner of the world and stop looking to us.
Then what? Then the U.S. just abdicates its entire hegemony. The U.S. just like, oh, you guys figure your own shit out. Like, why would we do that? Why would we give up that influence?
Why do we need to be involved? How does
the leader of the free world? It ensures
the,
us safe trade routes. We get awesome trade
deals. But how does being involved in Eastern Europe really help us that much? It really doesn't.
Because
I mean, we can like get into specifics of like what is beneficial about democracy ruling in more countries. Well, it generally means more stability. With this country, if we have close ties, it means more trade. There's a lot of information. I mean, like, I hate to be a war hawk. This isn't really being war hawkish, but we're getting a lot of intelligence out of this war when it comes to like weapons and stuff like that. Like, if we want to be selfish, even though it's not really the majority of the reason why I support this war at all, it's moral grounds. Like, you can make a selfish argument for supporting Ukraine easily as an American.
Because it sends a statement that we live in a world that past 1991 where people don't take over parts of countries anymore and steal land from them. I think that international concept is a really important concept to defend. And the idea that big countries can just
step in. And I would agree with you, but us saying that we don't want that to happen is not going to change the fact that it will happen.
Well, it is changing the fact in Ukraine right now that it's happening, right?
No, because Russia's still doing this.
Russia is losing horribly against a country that it was supposed to take over in 2 weeks. So I think the United States has been pretty successful so far.
In hindsight, Russia never had what they needed to actually take over Ukraine.
Maybe, but it's hard to say how successful Ukraine would have been without the massive amount of intelligence and support from the United States and other countries that have been like.
But again, I don't. Poland is in that region of the world. Poland has put a lot of like military and financial support behind Ukraine. If Poland wants to stand and be a leader of the Eastern Europe, let them be leader of Eastern Europe, and let us be the leader of the Western Hemisphere and over here in our home town.
With Canada and Mexico,
all of South America, the Caribbean.
Live in a global world. I mean, like I don't think we can really just section ourselves off from the world. because, oh, it might be difficult.
So I think that generally when we talk about like our sphere of influence and the allies and the relationships that we've built over time, I think our European allies are pretty close to us, pretty important. And I think ensuring like the general safety and security of Europe has been a pretty defining fact of Europe in the 90s and onwards. I think that having like a more stable continent that we're trading with.
Somebody in chat, somebody in gutter chat, AK Cruiser said he thinks oceans are no crossing zones. True.
We're doing businesses we have a history with. I think that's a pretty important concept.
But again, they should be able to defend themselves. They don't need us.
We don't want them to do everything on their own. We want to be their friend.
We can be their friend without saying that we will fight your battles for you.
We're not fighting battles for them. We're just giving help.
We're helping
right?
them.
Ukraine's
We're
fighting
just
the battles.
sending them
Their
weapons.
soldiers
We're not
it's
fighting.
their
When they
people
have
there.
our missiles and our officers telling them where to point them, and all they're doing is pulling the trigger, that's not necessarily.
What do you mean? What do you mean? He's making it like there's like an officer in the ear of Ukrainians, like right over there, fire, 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 and that's all that's happening. Okay, number one, we give them intelligence about the locations of some of the places that they could shoot. We do that. We do not have officers on the front line with the soldiers firing javelins saying, fire there, right? We don't have that. And when you say all they're doing is pulling the trigger, here's the thing. By having boots on the ground, you're the people who die, you're the people who get injured, you're the people who get PTSD. They're not just pulling the trigger. They're dying, they're getting injured, they're getting PTSD. It's their civilians that are suffering. Ukraine is taking the vast majority of the toll of this war. No holds barred. They aren't just pulling the trigger. Come on.
The ones that are putting bodies like into the ground. They're the ones that are dying for their cause.
And most of their successes are coming from missile targets and taking out major military targets. That's mostly the U.S.'s.
This is revisionism. I don't know what he's talking about. Look, the breakdown of the offensive on Kiev wasn't just due to missile strikes. That was due to poor Russian planning, poor Russian logistics, and Ukrainian military tactics ambushing them all along it, making that advance on Kiev pathetic. The same thing was true about the defense of Kharkiv, the defense of Mykolaiv, the defense of many locations, that it was the Ukrainian tactics, Ukrainian officers, it was mostly Ukraine. We have assisted them by giving weapons that they have used against ammo dumps and have used now later into the war as our weapons actually started to arrive in greater numbers to maybe to have like a large impact on, say, the Battle of Kupiansk or the Battle of Kherson. But even in those wars where we had those battles where we had a bigger impact, it was still Ukrainians doing the vast majority of the fighting and the dying and the vast majority of the effort to win. But they were using at that point, yes, a lot of American equipment. But the majority of the reason of these battles were not won just because America like came and saved the day.
Sure, the U.S. has helped a lot for sure, but like it's Ukraine's war to fight, and they are fighting it, and it's their land to fight. And I think there's an important concept. Like let's roll the clock back, and let's say that we do this. Let's say that Russia goes in and they just invade Ukraine, and now they just own Ukraine. Like, is that an acceptable like?
That would never happen.
Why not?
For example, you would have to effectively take out all of Ukraine to do that.
Well, they already had Crimea. They had already had, like, they were doing okay in the Donbass. Like, if they were to do a full invasion like they did...
Well, the problem is that the Ukrainian people remember what it was like to be under the Soviet Union. They remember they remember the Holodomor. They don't want to be under Russian control again, and they will fight to the death for that.
We don't know that. A lot of countries in the Soviet Union, a lot of the states didn't want to be part of the Soviet Union. That's why when it dissolved in 91, that's why we were like, oh, well, we're leaving now.
Well, and that's why so many of them came to a Western sphere of influence, because Russia treated them horribly.
Yeah, but you're the one trying to punish them for that. Like, no, you're not allowed to come to our sphere of influence. Go back to the Soviets. Go back to the Russians. He's like acknowledging how shit it is, but just saying, oh, that's just Ukraine's
and they remember
position. They just gotta deal with shit. Their life is just shit. They gotta deal with it. LSSR, man. You know what I'm saying?
It's
sure, but Ukraine is included there, right?
This is why some amount of self-determination in who your government is just better for the world, because it's harder to force people to be a part of a government they really, really don't want to be a part of. And Russia would effectively have to wipe out Ukrainians to get that done. I mean,
I don't think they would have to wipe out Ukrainians anymore. They didn't have to wipe out Belarusians to basically have Belarus be a puppet state of Russia. I think that they can keep a country under its thumb without wiping out all of the citizens. They essentially did the same thing in Georgia, too.
But again, they didn't just incorporate Belarus into Russia. The people in Belarus are part of the Belarusian government, not the Russian government. If Russia were to come in and take over Ukraine, they would end that.
Dude, with how many mistakes this guy has made this conversation, I'm surprised he knows that Belarus exists. Look, I wouldn't be giving him such a hard time if he wasn't a candidate for public office, okay? And he wasn't the one who brought this discussion up in the first place. He brought up Ukraine as a criticism of Biden. So, like, it's those two things that make me go hard on him, because he was so confident going into this saying, yes, it was 2012. I don't know what you mean. He was going pretty hard, man.
That sense, have to.
I think they would want Ukraine to be another Belarus. I think their goal was they wanted to march into Kiev. They wanted to take over in 2 weeks. They wanted to install a new leader and then have them leave, and then the new leader would be like really partial to the Russian government, essentially.
Which is effectively what Ukraine had before that government got overthrown.
Yes, which is
So,
why they overthrew the government.
Again, why wouldn't it just happen again?
Because now you've got a Russian army invading and killing people and doing a huge show of force, saying like, well, if this happens again, we're actually going to invade you.
And this is exactly like the Holodomor, which the Ukrainian people don't want anymore. You're
Okay, I am too triggered to go through the history of the Holodomor and say no, this is not like the okay, whatever.
People would never submit to that after what they went through in 2014.
I don't buy the argument that like Russia can't take it over without any foreign help. Like I think the foreign help has been pretty important to Ukraine being able to resist.
I think it's been important. I think they could have. I do think that without foreign help, there's a good chance that they would be annexing more land right now. I don't think they would have taken over all of Ukraine, but without foreign help, like, it's hard to imagine that the government would have been able to protect. It's possibly they would have lost the capital later on, mind you. I think they would have lost like everything outside of maybe like Western Ukraine. I think there is a possibility that that would have happened, like losing like Kharkiv and Mykolaiv and Kiev and Ri and Odessa, like a lot of territory that doesn't want to be part of Russia. I don't think we're the main reason that they're winning, but I do think we were a heavy contributor to their success so far.
So far, like I don't think without any foreign help they would just magically be able to fight off.
They had a lot of success in the initial. They didn't have the military support in the first 2 weeks. They didn't have material support in the first 2 weeks.
They had U.S. intelligence support at the very least since the very beginning, right?
Yeah, but and again, that's not necessarily the same as material support, though. Like
Sure.
they on their own were able to deal with a lot of Russian targets without having
not a lot
any real weaponry.
Sure, but do you think they would have the success in this war that they've had without U.S. support?
Absolutely.
No shot.
So the problem
Why
is,
would we be sending them tens of billions of dollars in weapons packages? Why is Zelensky and everybody begging us to continue support if it didn't make that much of a difference? Like you said it yourself, like most of the victories they're scoring are with like U.S. missile systems and stuff being shipped in from like Poland and like other Europe.
Yeah, this is the thing. Somebody said in chat his politics are incoherent. This is where I feel it the most. Earlier he's saying, hey, American missiles are like the primary reason they're scoring all these victories. But now it's like, oh, Ukraine would be performing just as well if we didn't send weapons. Well, like he's got to choose a lane here.
European countries too.
Again, Poland can do whatever the hell they want. That doesn't mean that we should also be doing it. Poland has given them billions of dollars in missile systems, tanks,
He's not addressing what Destiny just said. He's not addressing the fact that his worldview is incoherent. On one hand, he's saying that the majority of the victories they're scoring are because of America. But on the other hand, he's saying, well, you know, they would have performed just as well if the United States wasn't involved. And he just like pivoted out to, well, I just don't think we should help them. Like he's not addressing the incoherency.
Offloaded their entirety of their old Soviet systems into Ukraine for them to use.
Yeah, but I think part of this is due to U.S. leadership, like bringing everybody together to recognize that this is...
No, Poland hates Russia. Poland does not want to be.
I understand, but hating Russia and being willing to ship, because initially wasn't Poland fighting us on like shipping stuff to the country, like with planes and stuff? I think that wasn't it Biden that eventually got them to cave on that. And I know that Germany and France were reluctant to put some tariffs and sanctions on Russia as well. Like we had to fight a lot for them to get kicked out of the SWIFT banking system. Like I think the United States has taken point at a lot of these negotiations. I don't know if Poland would have helped in the same manner they are now if it wouldn't have been at the U.S.
They don't have the same influence
to do so.
No,
like, I know they hate Russia, but
no, I think if Russia got far enough in Ukraine, they would be all there for it.
Well, they get far enough in, then it's too late at that point.
They don't have all the resources that we have. Poland we are the wealthiest nation God has ever created. They just don't have the resources we do. And they're not respected in the same way we are. Even though America has a lot of problems, like when America talks, the world listens.
Right.
If Poland knows that if Ukraine falls, they're next, and they don't want to be next.
Well, I don't think Poland is ever going to be next.
Yes. Historically, dictators don't stop once they've taken over a couple things. They keep going until they have nowhere else to go.
No, okay. I'm just making sure I wasn't crazy. No, Poland is in NATO. Poland's never falling. No NATO country. This is why the Baltics.
He had to double check to make sure that Poland was in NATO, didn't he? That's what he did. He went down there and he Googled, like, am I sure Poland's in NATO? Yes, Poland's in NATO, Destiny. Poland is in NATO, yes.
Aren't worried about being invaded. Poland's not worried about being invaded. If you're part of NATO, you're not going to get invaded. That's why Ukraine wanted to be in NATO.
Not now.
What?
Wait, do I still got the Poland meme loaded up? Loaded up here. Do I still have it? I think I do. Right here.
It's me again. I need someone to be my friend. Someone who won't run away. Maybe send me an angel. The nicest angel you have.
Dude, it's such a great meme. Good one. I love that one.
I mean, they don't have they need to build up their military first.
They don't need their
would.
military. They have the United States. They're NATO.
No, Russia.
What about Russia? Russia's not invading a NATO country.
Not now. I'm saying they need to build
Never.
up their
They won't.
military.
They won't. Even with the military. Because it'd be nuclear war. It'd be over.
No, it wouldn't.
Yes, it would be.
No. Conventional warfare
I mean, we don't know for sure it would be, but it would be so close to possible. It would be so possible that it should probably be avoided.
between two nuclear
Burns
countries
is
does not necessarily
immoral.
mean that you're
It
wrong.
would if it was between Russia and NATO and the United.
Hey, Frogboy Jones with the tier 1 being sub for 24 months, currently on a 24-month streak, 2 years. Sheesh, my guy. Shout out to you for still being around. I remember turning in for live map coverage Lamau. Also, any plans to go back on DP anytime soon? Hey, if the Drunken Peasants want me back, I'll come back anytime. But it's just that a lot of people don't like talking about Ukraine, or they find it difficult sometimes to relate to the hardcore political stuff that I almost 90% concentrate my time with. I think a lot of people want to talk like red pill issues now. They want to talk like relationship stuff that I don't really feel too qualified to talk about, which puts me in a weird position on a lot of these shows. I don't think that really heavily applies to Drunken Peasants, but that does apply to a lot of shows that would be very interested in going on. Like, you know, the stuff like No Jumper and stuff like that. It's just, at the end of the day, like, I don't think I'm like the type of guest that they would end up wanting. Hopefully that isn't the case for Drunken Peasants though.
United States. This is why Russia and the U.S. are so careful not to cross swords. It's because they know that that's where it could eventually lead, right?
It could. That doesn't mean it will.
No, but I don't think Russia's ever invading a NATO country. I think this is why Russia was invading not Poland. This is why Russia does invade Ukraine in the way that it does. When you keep those civil wars going in the southeast, you know that a country that's in conflict can't join NATO. It's why they only invade countries that aren't in NATO. It's why they try to shoot missiles or do anything with countries that are in NATO. It's the same strategy they did in Georgia is what they're doing now in Ukraine. I don't think Russia's going to fight. Yeah, I'll give you the last word on this. Go for it.
Oh no, I was just saying I have to go to class. So
Yeah.
You know,
Please
my
pay
thing
attention.
I don't see a world in which the U.S. getting involved in hundreds of small wars throughout everywhere is any good thing. This has been a
Nobody said
problem with US
hundreds. We're talking
presidents
about
going
one
back
war.
basically to World War One. We should not be getting involved in all of these wars across the world because when we do, it sets a precedent that we should be there for the next one. And the problem with that is that it puts American money and American lives in places that it does not need to. And the more involved we are in Ukraine, the more likely this becomes the U.S.'s actual involvement as opposed to this sort of pseudo-involvement where it's basically a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. And I don't think that we should be fighting proxy
I
wars
hate
anymore.
calling it a proxy war. I hate calling it a proxy war. I understand what people are trying to get at with saying proxy war, but it makes it sound like it's just America and Russia that's keeping this thing going, and not the will of the Ukrainian people to struggle for their own freedom.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation, my dude.
Okay, I don't want to watch any more of that. I think Destiny performed relatively well. I do think he made like a few mistakes, like when he sets, like, you know, when it came to the Afghanistan thing and the 13 people dying, not really bringing that up. And he was making an argument based on the idea that nobody died during the withdrawal, that no Americans died. I think that there was some stuff about Ukrainian history that took him some time to get adjusted to, and he just doesn't know. But that's fine. I think he, under the circumstances, definitely considering the other guy brought it up, and he set up for a Joe Biden debate, not a Ukraine debate. I think he performed relatively well. Performed relatively well. Dylan, would you talk to Matt Binder about possibly going on the Majority Report to challenge Sam on Ukraine? Challenge Sam on Ukraine. What would I need to challenge him on Ukraine?